Welcome to today's explainer. We've got a truly fascinating text to unpack today, one that completely redefines the concepts of power, governance, and corporate influence in South Korea. We're going to be looking at a radical philosophical framework that takes basically everything we traditionally believe about political hierarchy and just flips it entirely on its head. Honestly, if you thought you knew who holds the real power in a nation, prepare to have those assumptions completely dismantled.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because our source material forces us to confront a really core provocative question. Is the president the true leader of a nation? Now, in most conventional political science, the answer is an obvious yes, right? But according to the unique philosophy we're exploring today, the answer is a definitive, resounding no. The text argues that the entire world is actually suffering from a massive misconception about what the highest political office truly represents.
To understand exactly how the source arrives at the starting conclusion, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll examine the illusion of leadership. Second, we'll explore the radical idea of the president as a student. Third, we'll apply a new presidential criteria to recent history. Fourth, we'll look at who it claims are the true leaders, CEOs as modern tribal chiefs. And finally, we will explore Korea's global destiny.
So, kicking things off with Section 1, the illusion of leadership, redefining the highest office.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how the source text sets the stage. It describes South Koreans as a historically underestimated and mistreated people who are, inherently, universally gifted. The text argues that every single citizen possesses incredible potential, but right now, this potential is being completely mismanaged. Why? Well, because the people sitting in the highest political offices, the ones tasked with managing the nation, fundamentally misunderstand their own jobs. The source explicitly strips the title of leader right away from politicians. It argues that ministers and presidents are not leaders at all. Instead, it defines a president merely as a worker or a servant of the people, who has been sent to that specific office to do a job and, most importantly, to learn. They're highly paid workers sent to an important post for sure, but they lack the fundamental philosophical grounding to actually lead.
Which brings us to Section 2, the president as a student, the ultimate academy. This is a really fascinating logical pivot. If the president isn't the leader of the nation, then what exactly is their actual role? According to this philosophy, if you are elected to the highest office, you aren't there to rule. You're there to enroll in the ultimate academy. The source text uses this incredibly vibrant, striking metaphor. The Oval Office is a massive research institute. It argues that the presidency is not a place to wield authority. Instead, it's the final grandest stage of personal and worldly study. The nation provides the president with an incredible support system, secretaries, corporate backing, national prestige, but not so they can boss people around. It's so they can embark on a profound, state-sponsored educational journey in anthropology and global affairs.
So the source actually mandates a very specific 5-step journey for any president during their term. First, they have to use the nation's prestige to meet global leaders. Second, they must listen humbly. The text really stresses this. A president shouldn't be doing the talking. They should be listening to the difficulties and hardships of other nations. Third, by doing this globally, they gather massive amounts of data on how humanity actually lives. Fourth, if they do all of this correctly, the text claims this accumulated data will result in a sudden burst of profound wisdom. It's described almost like a physical reaction, this burst of physics or supreme insight. And finally, step 5, after their term, they are supposed to open a foundation to breed just one true global politician who lives entirely for the world.
All right, moving to Section 3, a new presidential criteria, evaluating the modern era.
With that highly specific 5-step educational journey in mind, the text applies a really strict, unique metric to evaluate modern presidents. It establishes what it calls the 3-to-7 rule. And this brilliantly illustrates the idea. The text insists that a successful president should only allocate about 30% of their time to domestic management. Signing papers and checking in on the internal state, which the text argues practically runs itself through ministers anyway. The remaining 70% of a president's time must be entirely dedicated to meeting international leaders, absorbing their environments, and studying the world. Now, applying this specific metric, the source makes some pretty bold claims about recent political figures based strictly on their capacity to attract and meet global leaders. I'm strictly reporting the text's evaluations here as a neutral observer, so let's look at what it says. The text claims Park Geun-hye had the environment to meet 70 to 80% of global leaders, but lacked the principles to do so effectively and lost her power. For Moon Jae-in, the source claims he had the natural access to meet world leaders but essentially wasted the time. Regarding Yoon Suk-yeol, the text asserts he possessed the environment where global leaders actively wanted to meet him, highlighting the exact qualification needed to execute that 70% international study rule. Finally, looking at Lee Jae-myung, the source bluntly claims he just lacks the international demand to be sought out by global leaders. Again, these are the strict evaluations of the source material based completely on its unique philosophy of international educational capacity.
Let's shift gears now to Section 4. CEOs as modern tribal chiefs, building from the ashes.
So, if the president is just a student and a worker, we kind of have to ask, who is actually leading the country? Well, the text shifts gears dramatically here to the second half of its paradigm, pointing directly to the corporate heads, the CEOs and chaebol leaders. The text demands we completely abandon our traditional view of a corporation. Usually we think of a company merely as a business entity designed to generate financial profit, but the source's vision elevates these corporations into modern tribes. It argues that South Korea was built from absolute nothingness after World War II. In a landscape completely devoid of resources or organizations, these corporations rose up to become the true foundational backbone of the modern nation, making their CEOs the actual tribal chiefs of South Korea.
The text traces the evolution of these corporate tribes through a few crucial points. First, they were built out of post-WW2 poverty by the literal sweat of the citizens. Initially, sure, the government supported their growth, kind of acting as a scaffolding. But today, these tribes command tens to hundreds of thousands of members, their employees, and function practically as independent nations within the state. Because they are the true leaders guiding these massive tribes, the source fiercely argues that politicians absolutely must stop grabbing these corporate leaders by the throat to extract personal gain or manipulate them, because it damages the very foundation of the country.
Finally, Section 5, Korea's global destiny and the rise of the kings.
Having established that the true leaders are these corporate tribal chiefs, the text looks toward the future and the ultimate shifting balance of power between the state and the corporation. So the crucial point here is this staggering, mind-boggling number, hundreds of trillions. As these corporate tribes continue to grow, amassing hundreds of trillions in assets, a fundamental shift occurs. The text points out that these corporations have become incredibly massive, self-sustaining economic engines. They are reaching a scale where they achieve total and complete financial independence from the state that originally fostered them.
And the logic of the source text here is absolute financial sovereignty equals freedom from state control. Historically, governments could strong-arm corporations by threatening to withhold investments or banking support. But the text argues that this leverage is just entirely gone now. If the government threatens to withhold funds today, the massive corporations will simply say, "Fine, we don't need your investment anyway." Through their own massive legal entity economies, the corporations have completely outgrown the state's capacity to control them.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought from the source material. With the politicians cast as mere students and the corporate tribal chiefs achieving total financial sovereignty, the ultimate goal, according to the text, is for these corporate leaders to step onto the world stage, earn genuine global respect, and effectively become the new international royalty, the literal kings of the modern era. Will they achieve this destiny? And what exactly does that mean for the future of state oversight? It's an absolutely fascinating paradigm shift to consider. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning where true power really lies.